with our core values, wellness, equity, and engagement. And then we also, on top of that, talked about how that aligned with our strategy moving forward of focusing on engaged learning, equitable opportunities and outcomes, inclusive practices, and the social emotional well-being of students. And in particular this year, we tried to emphasize through our kind of realignment of some of our special education programs, equitable opportunities and outcomes and social emotional well-being for students. Just to recap, again, this is the Budget Saturday slide, but some of the priorities that we set in order to meet our guidelines that you set as a school committee were reallocation of existing resources in order to continue our strategic growth through the budget guidelines. We fully understood as an administrative team, and I know you understood as a school committee, the impact and gratitude for the school community having supported the school building project, and we wanted to make sure we recognized that and knew that our community's resources were finite, and that we wanted to work within that. We also wanted to make a commitment to a multi-year fiscally responsible transition to tuition-free all-day kindergarten, and then we also needed to think about how we could continue implementation of our capital improvement plan that we developed last year. So in the recommended budget, we had really 5 major categories and then an outcome. We reallocated our resources to meet our budget guidelines. So we maintained our level services that we had in FY 20, but in addition, we added support in special education and mental health supports, as well as some other strategic additions in the general education program. We deferred some capital growth at the district level in next year's budget, where we're level funding capital at $1.2 million in the operating budget, and we are still able to fully execute the FY21 capital improvement plan. If you recall, and Dave is going to talk about this in a few moments, the first year of debt payment for the bond for the capital improvement plan will actually happen during FY21, so about $900,000 of that $1.2 million is dedicated to that debt payment. We took the first step in reducing tuition for all-day kindergarten, and we were able to reduce tuition by $750 per family per year. That is a flexible multi-year plan. We, as a group, made a commitment to being able to go to tuition-free all-day K, but what we didn't do was set out a specific timeline. In recognition that circumstances change, we don't yet know the full impact of the Student Opportunity Act, and we have to evaluate that on an annual basis. We also were able to account for our fixed cost increases in salaries, health insurance, Middlesex retirement, special education transportation, and our out-of-district tuitions. And as you recall, those were the major budget drivers for FY21. And then finally, in order to be able to balance that and minimize the impact on the community, we do have just over $1 million of E&D scheduled for use in FY21, and we are using about $3.3 million of circuit breaker. And those are both significant increases from prior fiscal years. The overall impact of the budget was about a $3 million increase, or 3.29%, and the assessment to Acton is 3.26%, and to Boxborough, 1.42%. There were 6 key strategies in all of this, which are to maintain our level education services, i.e. a level service budget, reallocate existing resources to address our needs and guidelines, review and realign our special education services, slow the growth of capital funds, reduce kindergarten tuitions, and use additional reserves to moderate impact on towns. I said that before, but I just want to reiterate that was the focus of this budget process. I'm going to turn this over to Dave because, as we had talked about on Budget Saturday, the one remaining piece of the budget that had to be determined as a Budget Saturday and was left intentionally vague was the impact of the new school debt on the operating budget. As you recall, in order to pay the first year of debt service in FY21 for the new building project, we actually had to have an allocation in the FY21 budget for that. Dave has been working on that diligently with his team in the Debt Strategy Subcommittee and has some additional information for you tonight. And it is good news, but I won't spoil that for him by saying it's good news.
Thanks. So the other good news is you suffered through a discussion led by me about OPEB, so now we get to talk about bond financing and bond premiums and things like that. So I'll try to be brief because you have some material, and there were some additional handouts tonight. The larger package that has a 2-page memo on the front of it, I wish that had gone out with the original package. We had a miscommunication locally and just realized today that it hadn't gone out, so I apologize for that. and the smaller two-pager front and back was material that was handed out at ALG last night. So I figured you should know the information that's gone to that group as well. So we're going to talk briefly about how much money needs to be in the district budget next year to pay the first year debt service on the new school debt. And we're going to start by saying, when we last met, this is what the projections were for the taxpayer impact, the first year taxpayer impact for the average taxpayer in Acton and Boxborough. And look at the light blue numbers: Acton $452 per average single family taxpayer, Boxborough $314. Those, I call your attention to those because those are both the 30-year issue amounts, and that was the consensus of the debt strategy subcommittee, as well as administration, as well as Margaret, to moderate the impact to taxpayers on a long-term basis, and frankly more closely align the life of the debt with the expected life of the building. Legally can't go beyond 30 years. That's the maximum allowed by Mass General laws. So we put this little chart together. The total project budget, you may know by now, $117.3 million. We backed out contingencies for purposes of what should we borrow right now. We won't need the money to pay for the contingencies right out of the gate. And so when you back those out and reduce by the maximum MSBA grant, we're trying to reasonably maximize how much we take out initially to take advantage of the low interest rates. We had talked about some numbers as low as $50 million for the first slug of money from the bond, and we said no. The interest rates are so low and to our advantage. We should take out as much as possible without over borrowing, which has legal connotations in the eyes of bond counsel. So that's where we came up with a targeted number for the initial bond amount of $75 million. But we're not necessarily borrowing $75 million. Bonds, I gave an example in the handout material. Bonds are sold to bond buyers at an auction. The bond buyers are financial institutions and the like, and they have customers to whom they will sell individual units of the bonds themselves. So out of a $75 million bond issue, somebody here might go to their own financial advisor and be talked into buying a piece of an Acton Boxborough Regional School District bond, and so there's a retail market for bond customers. The bond bidders will select and this is how confusing this is. So let me start again. The bonds themselves will carry a coupon rate, meaning the piece of paper that exhibits the bond will have a stated interest rate, be it 5% or 3%, for example. But the marketplace is not at 5%, and so the numbers that they're telling us is we may be in the 2.5% effective interest range. Well, if you're going to receive the coupon rate, which is 5% over a 30-year period of time, but the effective interest rate in the marketplace, and it's an auction, so there'll be bidders, and it will seek the effective interest rate, is 2.5%. The bond buyer has to pay more money to receive that future cash flow at a higher than market interest rate. So I'll just pause for a second and just let that sink in. The effective interest rate is less than the amount that we're actually repaying, and so as a result, the district will receive a premium, and that's the difference between the $75 million face or par amount of the bonds and what they actually have to pay us in order to receive their bond repayment plus the coupon rate of interest. So far, so good? we have two options relative to that bond premium, and it's in the $6 million range. This is not a small, an insignificant amount of money. We can retain the cash and fund future capital projects, or even pay debt service as we go along, or we could reduce the initial amount of borrowing. And so I believe I have an example here. So option one, we would collect the $75 million that we need to finance the school project, and an additional $5.6 million. And that $5.6 million would be our money. We could keep it. We could use it for additional projects. We'd effectively pay interest at a 2.5% rate over a 30-year period of time. The first year debt payment would be about $3.9 million, broken out, as you see, $3.3 to Acton, $610,000 for Boxborough. And the impact of that additional amount of money that the district would have to pay on the Acton and Boxborough taxpayers would be $436 and $319, slightly less than the chart that we had up a couple of minutes ago. The other alternative is we take that premium, and instead of keeping it, we use it to reduce the amount of the actual debt that we incur. And as it happens here, that premium would be $5.2 million, and it's not 5.6 because it's proportionate with the face amount of the bond. So if the face amount is $70 million, the premium is not 5.6, it's 5.2 million. As a result of that, the first year debt payment is not $3,000,009, as was in option one, but $3,625,000. And the proportionate shares for Acton and Boxborough, $3,057,000 and $568,000, with the impact accordingly less on the average single family taxpayer, $405 for Acton and $296 for Boxborough. The treasurer is the one who has the authority to accept the low bid, but Margaret and I have been working very closely together, and Peter as well has sat in the last meeting we had with the financial advisor, and Margaret is going to make the decision that best has the long-term interests of the district and the taxpayers in mind. So I did a chart, and again, when I put this information together and presentation together, it was, hey, we got option one and option two, and there are advantages to both. There is an advantage to having a pot of $5.6 million available to the district, ultimately resulting in a smaller tax payment, smaller first year tax payment to the average taxpayers of both towns, and having that ability at very low cost financing to do other projects. On the other hand, and this was the persuading argument that came through loud and clear in the debt strategy subcommittee meeting, was we were not mandated to go out and borrow $75 million toward the new school project and see what else you can get, and we can just put that in the aside and pay for other projects as we go along. Our mandate was borrow the money for the new school project. And it's clear that reducing the initial amount of debt, one, results in lower interest costs over the life of the borrowing, and two, you can see it's a $31 a year difference on the average Acton taxpayer and a $23 a year difference for the average Boxborough taxpayer, the difference between option one and option two. And so the consensus of administration, being Peter, Margaret, and myself, and the debt strategy subcommittee, was to go with option two, which is, again, reduce the initial amount of the debt. So this was a newer slide. You see the timeline. This is coming fairly quickly, and there's an interplay here between us wanting to get the bonds on the street, the term for bond offering, and also the timing of both towns' town meetings, or Acton's town meeting in particular being the first, and having to back up that, the time from the Acton Town meeting to your final vote, which is required for terms of the regional agreement, we need to put an amount in your appropriation vote for next year that may not be the exact number that's required. These are estimated numbers based on a number of significant assumptions made by the financial advisor. We are optimistic that that there is enough conservatism built in, excepting for the unlikely event that interest rates will rise precipitously in the next month, that when the bonds are actually sold, the actual amount that we'll need to repay in FY21 and thereafter is actually a little bit less than this. It's a much simpler means for the school committee to reduce an appropriation amount after it's taken a final vote than to increase it. And so, given this timeline, you would have the March 5th meeting to consider voting a budget reduction based on the difference between the actual bond sale, which presumably will have taken place by then, and the amount that we're recommending in the motion wording tonight. It will also still avail Acton to print its town meeting warrant with the exact right number. When I wrote the motion wording, I believe you have 3 versions. You have option 1, as we've talked about, option 2, as we've talked about, and one with blanks in it because knowing that the committee can have its own ideas about things, could have gone in a different direction. And so you have, that looks familiar. The meme here is that it's your move, meaning that there are several options available to you, but I think, is this next? And so you've seen versions of this slide before. What we've done is we've taken and rolled forward from Budget Saturday on January 25th, the second column. The next to last column is the impact of the option 2 debt service repayment that I just talked about. A total amount of $3,625,000, Acton share $3,057,000, Boxborough share $568,000, and the resulting final budget. The total increase, yes, that does say 7.27% increase from last year. Obviously, 4% of it, or thereabouts, is from this one item alone, and the Acton and Boxborough assessment amounts, respectively.
So, just to reiterate that, for everyone here and for the millions of people at home, the operating budget has not changed since Budget Saturday. The operating budget is a 3.29% increase, with an impact to Acton of 3.06% and an impact to Boxborough of 1.22%. But we felt it incredibly important to be transparent with our community about what the actual impact on their taxes was as we move forward. And so we published this final recommended column because that's what we're going to be asking you to approve. And that's where the 7.27%, the 8.05, and the 6.15 come from. It's really the impact of the building project. And I just can't say that enough. It's just like last year when we reiterated over and over again that the borrowing for the capital improvement plan was through the operating budget.
And one other thing of note here is that for what it's worth relative to ALG, the revised Acton total of $66,163,514, or yes, $66,163, includes $3,057,000 relating to the new school debt. The ALG financial model has been carrying for quite some time $3,411,000 in that slot. So this is a significant reduction from what the ALG model has been carrying.
So this is language. You have several different versions of a motion in your packet, I think 2. based on what option you as a committee feel like you want to do with the bond. However, we are recommending the committee go with option 2, which is the least tax impact to the community. And so that is the language that's before you on this motion. We're happy to take any questions.
I was just going to say, so questions and things now, and we're not going to do the motions or the voting, right, until after we adjourn.
Correct, we just wanted to put it
hearing.
up.
Yeah,
This
okay.
is what it was.
And can I just make one more thing, one more statement as well? When we issue the bond, and I talked about the premium and tried to give you a really high-level understanding of that, the district will receive $75 million in cash, and that's the amount that's needed to pay our share of the total project cost less contingencies. That slide that I first put up that showed how we arrived at $75 million. We may need to borrow the remainder of the project funding at the end of the project. That's how projects used to get funded. You used to short-term borrow, and then when the project was all done, substantially complete, signed off, moved in, then you'd sell the bonds. We're in a position where we're getting guidance from our financial professionals that this is historically low rates of interest, 2.5%. I personally have never seen that in my career. So borrow as much as you can now without incurring penalties for over borrowing. So there may be another set of borrowing, fairly insignificant amount at that point, and coincidentally, in 5 years, which is about the time frame when that borrowing would take place, the biggest piece of existing exempted debt will have dropped off. And so there's a number of moving pieces here which mesh together really well. So the two things, we will receive $75 million, but the debt that will go on our books under these assumptions would be $69.8 million. That's a pretty good deal.
I wanted to start by just commenting that the debt subcommittee did have a chance to review all of this with Dave, and the process was exactly as he had described, that he and Margaret had met with bond counsel to talk about how this should be done. They had a recommendation, they brought it to the debt subcommittee, and I think the most important part of this relates to the what should we do with the premium. And there was consensus that this is a very significant challenge for our communities, and in that regard, the only appropriate thing to do with the premium is to use it to reduce the payments. And because the whole premium thing is a little complicated, I'm going to try and explain it a little differently. David can tell me that this is a wrong way to think about it. And this isn't mechanically how it works, but I think it's a little easier to understand. So when we get the 75 million, you could imagine that we would get 75 million, plus we'd get another check for $5.2 million. But instead of taking that check for $5.2 million and putting it in our pocket, we say, give us back $5.2 million worth of bonds. That's how I see the premium mechanically, and I think that makes it easier to understand what that premium is. So, and then the last point that should be emphasized is that these are fantastic interest rates, and I think the school committee and the administration did a good job through this process of saying, initially it's not going to be higher than this, and then it's not going to be higher than this, and I'm very hopeful that on March 5th, when we do vote that next budget, we'll see that we've made another significant ratchet down to get to a final number, which will still be a challenge, but will represent really an excellent job by all hands.
Thanks. Slide number 13, I have a question about that one. On option number 1, just trying to understand the numbers between Acton and Boxborough. Are those correct? That for Acton the difference is slightly higher and Boxborough is slightly lower?
So is the question relative to 436
Yes.
versus 319?
No, it's the bolded number compared to the one in parentheses is higher for Acton.
I can't account for why
Okay.
there's a disparity.
Okay.
I can tell you one thing is, all along the process, we used a 85-15 split for the shares. The actual split for next year is going to be 84-34, something like that, which on a decent sized number, it's a small percentage, but on a large number is a fairly significant amount. That could account for that. That's a great question, and I honestly hadn't noticed that, but so I don't have an answer. I didn't reconcile to the
Okay.
prior number.
I just didn't understand why it went in a different direction for one
That's the
town
only
versus
thing
the
I could
other.
think of
Okay.
is that it's because in the final analysis, the Boxborough shift is higher than we had been estimating before as just a percentage of
Oh, I
100%.
see. Okay.
So, trying to understand, so you're looking at the 750 is like cash. I view that it's like we're getting it, so we're putting into like an escrow account, something like that. And will we earn usually that if it's concept-wise, like the escrow account, there will be interest earned. Is that the case?
Yeah, so the $75 million is quite a substantial amount of money to be all of a sudden handed on a day in the not too distant future. And I've talked with Margaret, and the default assumption is to deposit it with what's called MMDT, Mass Municipal Depository Trust, which is the largest holder of government assets in the state, and they pay a fixed interest rate. They pay an interest rate which is the same for everybody, and it's based on short-term securities, a portfolio that they have, and maybe in the 1.5% to 2% range now. We recently got the Acton Health Insurance Trust to take the money and invest it with MMDT. It's safe, it's well-managed, it offers, it's liquid, and it offers a competitive return. Margaret can evaluate other options. She may have an idea that based on the cash flow requirements of the project, that, I'm not going to need this amount of money for another 2 years based on the projected cash flow, so I may not put it all in MMDT. But it's Margaret's call on that. She's professionally trained as far as investment management and would make a decision to maximize the interest. There's another caveat with that is you're not allowed to earn more money on depositing borrowed funds than you will repay. So if she were able to, for example, not that this is possible, but if she were able to get a 4% return, you unless, and it's too detailed to go into, unless you found some ways around it, you would have to rebate the ill-gotten gains, so to speak, the amount of money that you earned in excess of what you're paying back to the federal government. The reason for that is these will be tax-exempt bonds, so people who buy them won't be paying federal income tax on them. As a result, the federal government looks askance at the ability of a government to go and borrow money, tax-free money to the bondholders, and go and make money. It's called arbitrage, and that simply is making money off borrowed money. So that's something that has to be watched by everybody involved. And the simple answer to your question would have been yes, we're going to invest it, but there is, like everything else here, there's a little more than just what's on the surface.
Yes. So for the interest that we earn, is there a plan for that? Are we going to use that at the end of the project?
We don't have a plan for it as yet.
I think it's likely it would reduce what we would need to borrow later.
I have two questions. One is, are we driving the tax rate then down in Acton and Boxborough for the life of the loan or just the first year? That's number one. Can I just both and then you can answer? Okay, and then I just wanted maybe Peter to reiterate that we've level funded our capital improvement plan, you know, the amount that we're putting into to address our very, you know, vast capital needs. So I'm actually surprised that there are not like legal constraints on how you can use a premium that, you know, like a cash influx like that, because it seems kind of disingenuous to borrow money for a specific reason and then, you know, you kind of have this cash cow and you can do anything with it. So you don't have to answer that now. I'm just surprised that there's not legal constraints on it. Having said that, if we did do option A, which I wouldn't support, option one, is there something in the CIP that we could get done that we're not getting done now?
So the answer right now is no. You know, the only thing that we, in all honesty, had a conversation about internally is that something you could bank and then use toward future payment for like a Conant project? That certainly was a thought, but we didn't pitch the building project as a Douglas Gates Conant project, and so we thought to try and shift and pivot at the last minute with the community just wouldn't feel transparent and it would be disingenuous. So that's why we really think sticking with option two. What I will say is similar to the impact on the building project with the debt, which is a budgetary consideration. A budgetary positive for us is that the capital plan, we're also going to bond at the same time. That will likely yield another $300,000 in interest savings based on the plan that we're looking at. So even though we're level funding it for a year, based on our original projections from FY20, we're now $1.3 million in interest payments under what we thought we'd have to do. So we're really in a good position in terms of that. So even though it's level funded now, we're going to still come out to the good.
And your first question was, is this just the first year or what's going to happen? So the two options for how to structure the debt, one was make the same amount of principal payment each year, in which case the first year is the highest and it goes down. The one that we opted for was one akin to your home mortgage where the payments are relatively the same from year to year. So this is, for all intents and purposes, the amount that the impact for this building over the 30-year life of the bond.
So as I was reading through, you know, it was nice to see that we have the premium, and I was thinking that, you know, option one, the idea of putting it towards more capital. The question I had was, do we have the capacity? If we were to you know, opt for option one, would we have the internal capacity to actually manage the vast number of capital projects that we'd have?
It became, Paul, as Peter has said and I said before, a philosophical thing that this is not what we set out to do, and so it was just the consensus that we not go there.
Because I'm hearing that there's several questions about option one. Actually, I want to tell everyone that, you know, in the data strategy meeting, you know, when we talk about option one, and then when the money, you know, supposed to use for this new school building, and then used for other purpose other than the new school building, then may not be, you know, authorized by the town vote, the vote we already had, right? So it's like we need a new vote. So that got immediately turned down. So in that meeting.
I move we adjourn the budget hearing.
Wait, don't. Excuse me. Can I just interrupt before you adjourn? Sure.
Is there anyone from the public that would like to comment? All right, seeing nobody. All right, so there's a motion to adjourn on the table in a second. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Great, okay. So we've now returned to the open business meeting. So is there any more discussion amongst the committee about, or is there discussion amongst the committee, or are you ready to make a motion?
I'd like to make a motion.
All right, you may make a motion.
I move that the total appropriation for the Acton-Boxborough Regional School District for the fiscal year of July 1st, 2020 through June 30th, 2021 be set at $97,599,777, and that the member towns be assessed in accordance with the Education Reform Law and the terms of the regional agreement and amendments thereto as follows. Acton, $66,163,514, consisting of a capital assessment of $5,771,463 and an operating assessment of $60,392,051, and Boxborough, $12,230,727, consisting of a capital assessment of $961,655 and an operating assessment of $11,269,072, with the remainder to be accounted for by the following sources of funds. Anticipated Chapter 70 aid in the amount of $15,345,811. Anticipated Chapter 71, Section 16C transportation aid of $2,097,225. Anticipated charter school aid in the amount of $50,000. Anticipated federal Medicaid reimbursement of $250,000. Anticipated investment earnings of $300,000. Anticipated miscellaneous revenues of $17,500, and a transfer from E&D reserves in the amount of $1,145,000.
Second.
Is there any discussion? All right, all those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, that passes unanimously. Thank you. Okay. So I'm going to say that welcome to our general business meeting. We're going to do public participation and everything right now. I just want to note to the committee that we are already 30 minutes behind our schedule, and that we have a packed agenda with an executive session afterwards. So just be thoughtful in your comments. We certainly have plenty of things that we need to discuss tonight, so I just want to make sure everyone's being a good listener and keeping their comments brief and necessary. All right, so per policy BEDH, when members of the public may come up to speak for 3 minutes on items that are not included on this agenda. Is there anyone that would like to come up? All right, Mike. No, I told you, you have to you just pull it out.
There we go. Is this on? Yes. Can we go back to the budget for a second? No. So thank you. Good evening. My name is Mike Balulescu. I'm the president of the Acton-Boxborough Education Association, or the ABEA, the district's teachers union. I'm also an Acton resident. I am also a Merriam School parent. I want to begin by thanking you for giving me a forum to share my thoughts and speak on behalf of the ABEA. I'm grateful that the union and the school committee have a relationship that is honest, open, and collaborative. That relationship speaks to the deep commitment that you all have to education here in Acton and Boxborough. I also should acknowledge that while I am technically addressing you all this evening, my message is really intended for the community at large. Absent a literal town square to gather in, tonight's meeting seemed like the most appropriate forum for what I'm about to say. I come here tonight to address how some have chosen to respond to an incident that occurred on January 9th at Merriam School. I do not want to comment on the specifics of that incident, nor am I here to express anything less than full support for the independent investigation now taking place. The educators of Acton and Boxborough care deeply about equity and fairness for people of all identities in our community. We support a thorough review of any alleged incident of racism in our schools. And we are always looking to learn new perspectives, approaches, and ways to improve and grow as professionals. Moreover, I would be remiss if I did not name and own the lens of white privilege through which I view the January 9th incident at Merriam. I will never be able to fully understand the trauma experienced by the family involved, nor will I ever be able to fully appreciate the impact that the incident has had on our students and parents of color. The narrative of how this incident has been felt across Acton and Boxborough does not belong to me. Instead, I come here tonight to address a particular accusation made against one of our educators and association members on social media. An accusation made without facts, context, or any ability for this member to defend herself. I hope you will join me in condemning this kind of defamation, and I hope everyone in this room and watching this broadcast will take to heart how painfully these kinds of attacks are felt by every educator in the district. On the morning of January 29th, a member of the community posted the following on a popular social media page visible to thousands of people across the region, and I quote, "Black lives matter, black children matter. If you believe they do, then demand the following: fire Carolyn Imparato, Merriam School psychologist." This post was made in connection to the incident on January 9th, and the community member who posted it has a publicly disclosed connection to the same incident. It is also worth noting that 2 district administrators were named in this post, and I want to acknowledge that their pain is just as raw and just as real as Carolyn's. Now, I'm not here this evening to exonerate Carolyn Imparato or anyone else from wrongdoing. Carolyn believes, as do I, that no educator is immune to bias, and any accusation of racism in our schools needs to be investigated in a serious and transparent manner. I do hope that this investigation will confirm what I know about Carolyn, that she has dedicated her life to helping every child in her care, and that she is a professional with the deepest empathy and respect for the dignity of all people. But the social media post of January 29th had nothing to do with empathy or respect for anyone or anything. Instead, this community member lashed out at Carolyn with a defamatory accusation designed and calculated to cause maximum collateral damage to Carolyn and those she loves. This was not a heroic attempt to speak truth to power. This was an act of cowardice designed to blindside Carolyn and destroy her career before any facts were known. This attack was especially effective because Carolyn is not only a career Acton and Boxborough educator, she is also an Acton resident and parent. Her whole personal and professional life is here. She has nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. Now that this community member and his digital enablers have branded her as a bigot, Carolyn fears for the safety of her children and wonders what price they might have to pay because of the accusations made against their mother. There are some who might say that in the age of social media activism, this is simply the new reality for public figures and public officials. If you want the spotlight, you need to accept everything that goes with it. But while celebrities and athletes endure the cost of instant accountability with infinity pools, private jets, and the adoration of millions, educators enjoy no such luxuries. I've never seen a teacher take a limousine to school, and while Carolyn Imparato might dress like a rock star, she has no fan club to turn to for support when her name is dragged through the mud. As educators, we did not choose our profession because we want to be public figures, but public figures we are. And the only defense we have for our reputations is the hope and the trust that our students, our parents, and our communities will protect those reputations for us. I speak here tonight for Carolyn, knowing that the community member who attacked her will likely now come after me. And when that attack comes, as a teacher and resident and parent in the district, I too will have nowhere to run and nowhere to hide from his screeds and the sanctimony that he inspires. But I also know that bullies only respond to strength. And I teach my 8th grade students that when you tolerate a bully in your midst, when you choose to be a bystander and stay silent, you only encourage and empower the bully to hurt people again. So I rise tonight to speak for Carolyn, not because it is the easy thing to do, but because it is the right and the just and the only thing to do. The past week has brought to the forefront challenging and difficult discussions in Acton and Boxborough. I attended the community forum a week ago tonight, and my heart breaks for my neighbors and my students who feel marginalized in ways that I can never understand. We must continue to integrate empathy and cultural understanding into our community dialogue. We must give voice to the trauma of our families of color. And we must allow each other the dignity to be defined by more than a single story. But none of that important work will be accomplished by defaming and attacking the professionals in our schools. Indeed, if there is progress to be made here in Acton and Boxborough, our educators will be at the vanguard. Our educators will help do the healing. Our educators will get us there, one student at a time, one lesson at a time, one act of kindness at a time, and one act of selflessness at a time, modeling the empathy and the love and the critical thinking needed to create a truly inclusive community. So my call to everyone in this room and watching this broadcast is to reject the false bravado of social media. We will not get the community we want by gluing down our caps lock and spreading division. In fact, it is our response to that division that will help us move forward. That response must be authentic, and it must be resounding, and it must come from all of us. I hope you will join me in that response tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Is there anyone else from the community that wants to come up before we have our high school representative join us? All right, Michael, you want to come up?
I'm actually not quite sure how to follow that, although I do understand that there was some more conversations to be had. I got an email, I think an hour before I came, and I think Mr. Light will probably touch on that at some point in his presentation. So I'll keep it brief. With third quarter, I get to senior slide the rest of the year. I get to go to New Hampshire if I want to next week. That's fun. And I don't know, I guess there's 3 sort of events that happened in the past week that sort of shed a bit of light of like what the high school is like. I guess one of them didn't happen. So today we had a volunteer fair that the school organized. It's probably seasonal, thrice a year, and they bring in organizations that would like some student support, and the counseling department organizes that, and that's just something that it's a bit of a tradition, I guess. We also had the schedule, which you heard a lot about. There was a bit of an uproar about this time last year about now they're asking for feedback on that. There was a survey out to students, out to staff, and I'm not quite sure how Mr. Jory will be using that, but I trust that they're making some changes into how that works, like the logistics. I don't believe they're going back to what it was before. There was something that the student council tried to organize for. There was a dance that they were trying to do that failed due to low attendance, which tells me a little bit of something about sort of the demeanor of this type of student, well, the focus of our students, and it may or may not be a good thing, but I don't know. It was interesting to me. And also, there were many students who were a little annoyed at Mr. Light for not calling a snow day.
Thank you, Michael, for that update. All right, Peter, you want to give yours?
First, Michael, thank you. You can please pass on that if we lived in Florida, you'd have had a snow day today. No, I want to actually just start by congratulating a few of our student groups who have seen some success over the last few weeks. First, our academic decathlon team recently placed first in the Massachusetts Regional Tournament. Our Quiz Bowl team also saw great success in making it to the semifinal round of their tournament, and then unfortunately the team did ultimately lose to Boston Latin, but they had another strong showing across the state. And then finally, if you remember, Steve Martin came before you last year talking about the development of an esports team. We had a nice little update this weekend. They went down to Gillette Stadium for a statewide tournament, and our esports League of Legends team competed this past weekend at Patriot Place in their first ever finals. They eventually lost 2-0 to an undefeated Shrewsbury team, but the AB team went 16-2 over the season and represented us all well. So we are proud of all of the accomplishments of all the various students across the district. We obviously can't speak to all of them in one meeting, but I thought I would just highlight a few of them. So we wish all of our students a lot of success in the coming weeks as well. I also want to just make an announcement that tomorrow morning, Tessa and I are hosting our next community coffee with the superintendent and school committee chair. That is, and I apologize, in the written version it's incorrect, so we'll correct that for the morning. But tomorrow it is 8 to 9:30 a.m., although I will have to actually end at 9:15 a.m. I have another commitment. And then we have another upcoming coffee on March 10th. We're also providing a link to our community members in case they want to submit a question ahead of time that requires some preparation that allows Tessa or I to be able to come to the meeting with a little bit of information. So that is in there as well. I also wanted to just provide you a brief update on the dyslexia work that the district has been doing this year and our progress on the new literacy vision. I just want to recognize Deb Bookus and her entire curriculum team and a lot of the administrators around the district for coming together and really rethinking some of our early literacy work with our students. Earlier this fall, we did speak to you about one of our district-wide goals, specifically around the development of the district-wide vision for literacy. Specifically, our goal this year is to develop the pre-K through 6 literacy or reading vision and implement a plan, an implementation plan that will provide equitable access to evidence-based instructional and assessment practices which improve literacy outcomes for all students. This past weekend, several of our staff had an opportunity, and I was one of those staff, where we're very thankful that our Special Education Parent Advisory Council held a listening session for families who have children with dyslexia to be able to share their experiences in our schools. It was a powerful experience that provided us with valuable insight that we can use to shape our work moving forward. An update about our progress in the important work was then distributed to our CPAC officers, and I understand they're sharing that. I did put a link into this newsletter so that that can go out to all of our families across the district as well. I also want to say that in addition, although I think it's listed in the document, but I'm going to call out, we're very, very excited to announce that we have been selected as the single largest beta pilot testing site to collaborate with Boston Children's Hospital and Harvard Medical School as Dr. Nadine Gabb and her research team at the Innovation Digital Health Accelerator enter the final stages of development in creating an early literacy screening app for the use in kindergarten, which will eventually be extending to grade 1 and pre-kindergarten in the future. The screening app has been in development across the country in numerous states reflecting various demographics. We're hopeful that many or perhaps all of our kindergarten teachers will be able to take advantage of that opportunity during the beta test and be able to provide that feedback as we go through the process. Our early literacy coordinator had a great quote that I just wanted to share with you, and she said that, quote, "It is both inspiring and humbling to realize that Acton-Boxborough Regional School District is on the cutting edge of the latest research associated with early markers of dyslexia from world-renowned institutions and award-winning cognitive neuroscientists, including Dr. Nadine Gabb at Boston Children's Hospital and Harvard Medical School, Dr. Joanna Christodoulou at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and Massachusetts General Hospital, and Dr. John Gabrielli at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology." So we're very excited to be able to provide those updates. That is certainly ongoing work and will be, several years in the making, but some really great progress in this initial year. I also then want to just come back, and this is leading into your discussion that we've provided some time for, but our community conversation about race that we had last Thursday, we obviously know that that was in response to the incident at Miriam on January 9th. I did share some information at that point about the investigation, and I wanted to share that now for other members of the community who may not have been able to attend that. Incidents at schools, and I think I said this the other night, but they're always complex and multifaceted. For this reason, it's important for us to conduct an in-depth analysis of what occurred during the incident and take any actions we can to improve the responses as a district. I shared at the forum that we've contracted with an independent fact finder, his name is Jeffrey Sankey, to conduct a thorough review of the incident to determine if there are any actions taken by our staff based on race, to review the adequacy of our policies and practices for students in crisis, and to determine what, if any, improvements we should make. And then finally, to determine if we followed those policies and practices. Those are all three really big questions, and that is the focus of Attorney Sankey's work in the district. He has not done work previously on behalf of the Acton-Boxborough Regional School District, and he has no established relationships with our leadership prior to this incident. The focus of Mr. Sankey's work is special education, civil rights, and juvenile justice, and he primarily represents students and families. I expect this investigation to take several weeks in order to conclude, and we will certainly update our community as soon as Mr. Sankey completes his work. I also just want to thank the members of our community who came last Thursday to share their thoughts, feelings, and experiences with all of us about how students and families of color are experiencing our schools, and in all honesty, the broader community as well. This was a powerful evening for me personally and for the members of our leadership team who were able to attend. Based on the stories that were shared, we have a clear gap between the intentions that we as school educators have and some of the impact that that's having on our students and families each and every day. And I think that's going to be a really critical element of our work in the years going forward. I do want to reassure everyone who was in attendance at that community forum and our broader community that regardless of what the independent fact finder has to recommend coming out of his investigation, this work will be a priority of our district. We want to focus on inclusive schools. We want to focus on equitable opportunities and outcomes for our students, and we will be committed to that work. You know, since I first came to AB, I started with our faculty on the first day that I introduced myself to them, and I said I wanted 4 experiences for all of our students. I wanted them to be loved, I wanted them to feel valued, I wanted them to feel challenged, and I wanted them to feel supported. Our students do each and every day in our schools, but clearly what we heard during that forum is there's a group of students and families who have not been feeling that same level of inclusiveness, and that needs to be a focus for us. I just want to end by saying, you know, these incidents have a tremendous toll on everyone, our staff included. What I've learned of all of our staff during this process is just how passionate and caring our staff are for our children every day. This has been tremendously difficult for everyone involved. We want to keep the focus, as we do every day, on what we can do for kids and how we continue to improve our schools for kids. And what's been remarkable in all the staff I've talked to, that has 100% been the focus. So I want to thank them for being able to continue to put kids first in a very challenging time. But I know that they do that because it's what they love to do. So thank you, and I will turn this back over to Tessa.
So we've left space in the agenda. I know that many of you were able to attend the forum the other night, but we left space in the agenda just as a place for if anyone wanted to, you know, have a discussion at the table or just share their thoughts or whatever. So, anyone care to share? Paul?
So I was there, and I was, you know, pleased with Peter coming to organize the forum. There were some tough issues that were brought up, but I appreciate the way that Peter handled them. I'm not sure the general public appreciates the tension that Peter is under with respect to protecting privacy of you know, people involved. And sometimes I know that comes across as trying not to provide information, but it's a true desire to protect privacy. And from what I see, how Peter handled that, I think all of us can rest assured that if there's an issue that happens to us, that our privacy will be protected as well.
I just wanted to comment, it has been commented in some other context that, the things that happen are in fact a reflection of us. And one of my neighbors is African American. And so after the forum, I went to him to ask him a question that I knew the answer to. So my son, is about 5'6", he's sort of skinny. And of course, he's never been pulled over. His son is about 6'6", and he's ripped. He's a very good-looking young man, and his son has been pulled over. The reality is that this is something that exists in all of us, and it's something that the community, in addition to the schools, needs to be working on. And I'm very pleased that, one of the things that Diane and Peter did with respect to the school committee last year is to say, we think it's important for you to take the time to go through the seed training, to have a better understanding of this so that we could each individually, whether we happen to be here or out in the community, work towards being those better people who are, in fact, more inclusive.
I got to give Marie credit for SEED because she's the one who suggested it. I took her up on it. So thank you, Marie. Very briefly, I was at the community conversation. I hope that conversation is the beginning of the idea embodied in the aphorism that our Assistant Superintendent of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, Dr. Dawn Bentley, quoted in her August 12th, 2019 blog, "Do it afraid, because there is no manual." So as we step forward, maybe we can all remember that.
So I was there as well, and at the end, I was trying to talk to Peter, and which I really appreciate that you host the meeting. It was really well organized, and there's true transparency, true intention that we're trying to solve the issue, and we acknowledge that. So the end, I was trying to say, I think there's really good intention, and we're trying to focus on, and we have that as set our district goal. And there's one thing in all races which there's one thing that's common in all races, which is kindness. So I think as all of us here, that as leader, then we can start from here. And when we look at each other, we can look at each other in the eye. We can give each other a smile, and that starts the inclusiveness. And from each one of us here in the room. Thank you.
Did you want to come up, Michael?
I meant to put this in my update, but I wasn't able to attend the meeting last week, and I don't know if this came up there, but I just wanted to make the committee aware that an unspecified number of students are attempting to organize a walkout at 9:15 tomorrow.
Thanks for the update, Michael. Great. I was able to attend the forum, and my takeaway is that I hope that everyone that was able to attend the forum and those that I know were able to watch, because I know that there were some people that taped it and put it up on YouTube, that these conversations start to happen at home too, and that people are, that we're not just having the conversations as adults or as kids, because I know the kids are having the conversations in the high school as well, and maybe younger than that, but that we start to have the conversations together as parents and children and grown-ups of other children. Even tonight, I had a conversation with some freshmen that were at my house, just sort of asking them about their awareness, if they knew why there was a walkout planned, or what their thoughts were on that and what their experiences were. So I think it's an important conversation to have, and I hope that that's one of the first takeaways from the beginnings of these conversations, is that we will all have them together as a community. All right, so tonight, moving on from that, we welcome David Crane from McCarthy Town for the first of our school improvement plan presentations.
So welcome, David. I understand that's not the easiest of transitions to make into a school improvement plan update, but we very much appreciate you being here tonight and look forward to it.
Well, thanks, everybody. It's a pleasure to be able to talk about our school a little bit, and I'm also proud to be the inaugural principal in these new digs that you guys are now using too. I noticed that they've left, but I really wanted to acknowledge Mike's powerful statement and his acknowledgement of the constant and true professionalism of all the educators in this district. So I think that needs to be said too. This is not going to have a budget page to it, and it's not going to have a slide from Budget Saturday. But there is, when I was going through this, there was one slide from Budget Saturday that Debbie Dixon presented, which I'd like to recall later on in the presentation, if I could. So we're here to talk about our 2019-20 school improvement plan. The interesting thing is we put the slides together, and Peter forwarded to me some requests from Diane and from someone else about the co-teaching piece, so I've revised the presentation and I've added a few more slides. Okay. This, by the way, shows the perspective, the different perspective taking that different children can see in a single vision. The expert at anything was once the beginner. I wanted to begin that tonight because we're doing things that we've never done before in our school, and I think it's important to note that it is a beginning, and we are not experts at yet, but we are working towards that end. So the district core values that we talked about as a leadership team, the alignment and connections of the schools with wellness, equity, engagement, we hope are going to be reflected in the slides tonight and what we're doing at our school. So in order to increase opportunities, some of this I'm going to read directly from the plan, for one-on-one interaction between students and teachers, leading to stronger relationships, we will successfully create a co-teaching model with one of the two sixth grade teams in order to significantly reduce pull-out services for most sixth grade students receiving supported learning services in the McCarthy Town Learning Center. I want to point out too, before Don jumps in, is that there is no specific co-teaching model. There are many things that represent co-teaching, and we're trying to do one of those situations in McCarthy Town right now. So one of the important things, and this is an opportunity for me to thank Diane, because it actually allowed me to refine and I hope make a little clearer what some of the things that we're trying to do, is the key elements in all the approaches to what is mostly called collaborative learning, which I think is the better way to use it, is collaboration, and that has to be an understood activity that happens among and between all of the teachers, the regular ed teachers and the special educators who would be working in the classroom. Communication, because it's not only about planning, but it's about taking a look and a close look at the learning that's going on in the classroom in order to adjust practice. And time, and I put that in uppercase letters because it is one of the most valuable commodities in a school, and it's something that we don't have a whole lot of in terms of getting ready for how we think about instructional delivery systems at our school. So there needs to be the sense and the comfort level that all the students are ours and not yours and mine. And when you have a traditional teaching model of a single teacher, sometimes another educator in the classroom can create a different kind of dynamic. And that's something that the collaborative piece has to be able to overcome. So this is the book. Diane set this title today to me, Interactions, Collaboration Skills for School Professionals. And they talked about co-teaching as a specific instructional delivery option that's based on collaboration. And the district has been using Benninghoff as the guide for what we're going to be exploring as a district. And she's actually presented a couple of professional learning seminars with us, And so that's the model that I've used when we've talked about this for the past year with our teachers and with our school. And her view, and she calls it collaborative learning, and it's a coordinated instructional practice in which 2 or more educators can simultaneously work with a heterogeneous group of students in a general education classroom. It sounds wordy, but it's also hard to do, and it's something that personalities need to be jiving perfectly, and ideas about teaching and learning need to be jiving perfectly, and sometimes that coordination is difficult to achieve. You know, I'm happy that at this point in the year to be able to say that we're doing a pretty good job of it. There's been bumps, but it's really been terrific for the kids, and to watch what happens in the classroom as 2 and sometimes 3 educators are working with a group of kids. It's pretty remarkable. So these are the specific approaches from both authors and both leaders in this understanding this field of collaborative learning. In Friend's book, there is the 1 teach, 1 observe, 1 teach, 1 assist, parallel teaching, station teaching, alternative teaching. You can get the sense why Don believes very strongly that there is no single model, although they call them models. There's a duet model that Ann Benninghoff uses and talks about, lead and support, speak and add, skill groups, station models, learning style models, parallel teaching, and complementary skills, skills that complement the instruction, skills that need to be supporting that instruction. So I sort of drawn a connection between some of these things in both writers' ideas about what works best and what, you know, works well. Ann Benninghoff has many more ideas about how to do things, but they end up being somewhat similar to the way that Friend speaks about them in collaborative teaching. And all of these things are possible with different kinds of mixes of educators. Ann Benninghoff talks about mixing special educators or technology teachers or even physical ed teachers in a concept of co-teaching. So that there's a lot of stuff that can be explored with this. We're using a more traditional way of beginning it by having a single special educator working with 2 gen ed teachers at McCarthy Town. So with the bubble going into 6th grade, we have 2 teams of 2 sections. One does not have a special educator, but they still rotate through the math, science, and ELA social studies content areas. The other team is comprised of the 2 general ed teachers and a special educator with the same shared rotations. So our special educator works with ELA and with math in both rotations, and she has been able to bring special education teaching strategies into the classroom that benefit both regular ed kids and children who have learning differences or IEPs. And I think that what we've done is do a lot of things which good evidence-based teaching now is showing us is most effective with kids who are with generalized differences across the classroom, and that's small group work. And we're doing a ton of small group work in 6th grade that's really been very effective. The kids aren't leaving the classroom to have instruction in the learning center as much as they were before. They are part of all of the things that go on in the classroom now. The planning that can happen with the teachers is such that all kids can be included now in the things that are happening in the classroom. And that makes it a way that it really is inclusive. There have been bumps, as I've said before, but we're working on those things and we expected them. It's been good so far. And you know, it's interesting too, and I will remark that I did receive an email today, and some of those were thoughtful questions, and they were also the same kind of questions that we were asking ourselves at the beginning of this process too. And among them are process questions like, how do we assign kids, how do we change IEPs, how do we change things on the grid, what are the other things that we need to think about as we move into this? And So as we've been going on it, we've been talking with families, we've been talking with the special educators, and thinking carefully about how we can do this differently next year, but also how we can make the changes that we need to make right now, so it's going to be just as effective for all the kids. The critical elements for success are a strong social curriculum and a philosophy about that, understanding and application of universal design for learning, effective and purposeful differentiation for all the kids, and time, again, in uppercase letters. The district is also doing a lot of UDL work now, professional learning. All of the teachers have been involved in some piece of that so far this year for at least 2 of the Thursday sessions. So we're trying to mesh with what's going on with the district initiatives as well, and we're finding that some of this is really effective for what we're trying to do, and we're also finding some of the things that we need to dig a little deeper on. The strong social curriculum is important to note because there may be kids who are have behavioral challenges within the classroom, and so we're trying to build communities of all kids that can be in the classroom and stay in the classroom. And it's one of the things that is going to be, that's always something that McCarthy Town has prided itself on, is developing strong communities using social curriculum and making sure that the philosophies that are the underpinning of that social curriculum are strong in the classrooms. So looking ahead to next year, we're going to have 4 sections of 6th grade. We're going to have 3 sections of 5th grade. We're going to have 3 sections of 4th grade, 4 sections of 3rd grade, and 3 sections of grades K1 and 2. And the reason I want to recall a particular slide from Budget Saturday that Debbie posted was one that showed McCarthy Town with a tremendous, do you remember that slide that showed the long list of kids in the Learning Center and now what we're going to be doing in resource rooms for SEL, for social emotional learning? We have some challenges in our school, and how we meet those challenges are going to be the many different ways of looking at it. I'm trying to avoid the use of the word model, but when we talk about 3 sections of grade 4, those are kids who are coming up from our current grade 3. There are way more IEPs in that particular grade, and 3 sections of grade 4 may in fact require 2 special educators to work with their gen ed team. And how we apportion that out to make sense the best way for kids is something that we're still thinking about. And the same thing is true for the current grade 3, which will have 4 sections of grade 3. We want to make sure that all of those kids get their needs met equally too, and the problem is that there are also a lot of kids coming up with some significant learning challenges into grade 3. So how do we use the resources that we have in the school, the special educators, to best meet the needs of all of those kids? It may look different in grade 3 for so-called team teaching. It may look different in grade 4 than it does in grade 4, and it may look different in grade 6 for the same thing and for the same reasons. What's interesting is that this was supposed to be a school improvement plan presentation, and for me, it's turned mostly into talking about what we do in terms of team teaching and bringing in special educators, which is fine with me because this has really been my life for the last 8 months anyway, as we think about what we do. So I'm going to move on to something else if anybody wants to ask questions about this instead of waiting, that's fine with me.
So if you go back to your slide that says McCarthy Town Equity Goal, I just had one question on that, and it's about the wording and why you chose it. So your equity goal says the reason why this exists is in order to reduce pull-out services. And I'm wondering, number one, why it wasn't like to encourage universal design, to maximize differentiated instruction in the classroom, to reach all learners or something like that. And if you think that this might be problematic because it sounds a little bit, and I know this wasn't the intention, that the school council might be usurping the role of like the team in terms of placement decisions? And did that come up in when you crafted the wording of this?
So I think that when we did this wording, we did it to really generalize what the intent of the new teaching approach was going to be. So yeah, we wanted to make sure that we were going to be using UDL, and yes, we wanted to be doing other things. It wasn't in any attempt to predetermine what was going to be happening as in the team meetings, but I think that generally speaking, when we looked at what was going on around the school and children who were resisting going out for pullouts because they didn't want to miss what was happening in the classroom, that became a driver, and perhaps I should have been more careful about the language, but I think that the biggest driver for us was to make sure that the most kids we could include in the classroom activities, that was going to be starting to happen.
David, I just have a quick question, which maybe you can address at the end, but it strikes me just as important for this. So we've flip-flopped back and forth how we do school improvement presentations, and we're halfway through the year. This was your school improvement plan for this year, correct? Like these are all goals you're currently working on. So maybe at the end of the presentation, I'm just curious, like, I'm sure in your school councils, you've already started discussing what those things are going to look like for next year. So I'm just curious, you know, I know that the intent this year was to work with the 6th grade specifically so you could sort of, you know, discover the bumps and see what worked and that kind of thing. So at the end or now or whatever, I just would be curious what the goal is.
For next year.
For next year.
Yeah, so basically that's one of the reasons that I listed all the grade levels and what the challenges we're going to be facing as we think about what happens next year. And in one of the slides later on, I talk about placement, and we talk about those kinds of conversations too.
Quick question, yeah. So, you know, I was just thinking about, because I saw Amanda's email as well, and I'm realizing, oh yeah, I mean, we got IEPs that are kind of in place right now.
Yeah.
And, you know, trying to, you know, there's a lot, I imagine there's a lot of time in trying to, you know, mesh what the goal is with the reality of the individual IEPs. Do you have some kind of timeline? I mean,
So what we're trying to do is as new goals and new IEPs get written during reviews and annuals, we're trying to make sure that there's an understanding with families that this is something that we aspire to do. And we're trying to make sure that we explain the advantages. But, you know, in the past, we've had parents end IEPs simply because their children were so unhappy about being pulled for services in the learning center or the resource room, where to the point where before we had these additional services, we created what we call work block, which is a time when we know that appointments were going to be happening for the majority of kids, so that there would be no new work that would be done in the classroom while these kids were getting services in the learning center. So the idea has always been to include kids as much as possible in the Gen Ed classroom, and moving towards that. And I think that next year and in the years to come, just to anticipate later on, is that as we add special educators, we're going to be able to be more fluid about how we think about presenting instruction to all of the kids in the school, and placement is certainly going to be something that we have to spend more time on. In fact, at our faculty meeting earlier this week, we talked about what's going to be happening next year, and it's a shift because we're starting to talk about placement now, because we have to look and think about the kids that are going to be going up, and it gives us a little bit more time to shuffle the deck. And we know we're going to have an additional special educator next year, and that's going to make a tremendous difference in how we think about service delivery, not just to children on IEPs, but to typically developing kids as well.
Can we go to that slide talking about two teams? Now, the two teams that you present, one team is, yeah, here. So my question is that, so those two teams will those two teams share the same resource? Like you have one team you have 2 general education teachers, right? And then another team you have 2 general education teachers as well, plus 1 special educator. So I'm just curious, if you are sharing the 2 general education teachers, in 2 teams.
So one team doesn't have a special educator, one team does. The one team that has a special educator is strictly with that team. So that person there, it's like a team of 3.
Yeah,
for 2 classrooms.
I know that. But the things that, what about those 2 general education teachers are will 2 teams share the same 2 teachers, or like there are totally 4 teachers different?
There are 4 teachers altogether.
Okay, so my next question is follow-up is about, are you expecting that your teaching teachers will be doubled in the next, a few years? Because right now you're trying to say, hey, one classroom has 2 teachers, and then now I'm building 2 different teams, kind of not only double, it's called tripled.
Michael?
No, if you think about.
It's the number of sections that they have already.
Yeah.
Well, they're not adding teachers to do this. They're taking the current resources they have.
Yeah, that's my question that I try to understand, what's your plan for the,
For the next year?
Like for the budget and for the, for the future.
We're only using the teachers that the budget provides us.
So you are not expecting that you will, need to probably double the teacher?
Well, no, we've actually added, this year, we added a 1.0, and I think that was in the budget presentation.
Okay.
I think one of the things, to make a commitment to going to a real co-teaching model across the district requires additional special education teachers to be able to do it. You can't say that you want a co-teaching model and provide this level of equity for all students and not make sure that you have special education teachers in your classrooms. It can be efficient when students get pulled out of the content instruction to go to a learning center to learn it, because you can cluster students together. And so it can sometimes be more efficient from a teacher perspective to do that. But what's happening is you're actually depriving the students who desperately need to experience that type of content instruction from the opportunity to stay in a classroom and experience it. And so they're actually missing out on whole pieces of education because they're going for supplemental services somewhere else. When you try to push in to the classroom in a co-teaching model, you do have to make sure that you have enough special educators to be able to adequately support your classes. That's one of the things that, we talked at Budget Saturday that we started to do this year by looking at the number of resources we have in other areas and starting to shift to be able to add some of our special education teachers. And that's likely a pattern that will continue for us. So we look to, areas in our schools where, okay, we say, look, if this is historically over-resourced compared to similar districts, that's an opportunity that we have to think about as we have attrition in that area, that we might be able to look there to be able to then add some special education teachers along the way so that we can gradually move to this model. It's not something that we could ever just dive right into and say we could do in every classroom in every district. I don't think we would ever have enough money to have every team in every school be truly, a co-taught team. You just can't do that. What I've seen successful in some schools is to be thoughtful. Both teams likely have students who might be supported with IEPs. However, some students will require very specific content instruction and support and modification of curriculum that can only be delivered with a special educator. And then some students on another team might actually have some supports and supplemental services that actually could be provided with an assistant. And so one of the things I talked about is, on Budget Saturday, is making sure that we match the needs of the students with the role and qualifications and skills of the educator working with them. So it's a complex issue, but to be really clear, yes, you do need additional resources to go to this model, but we have opportunities within our existing staffing to be able to look for that.
One of to that question too, I want to go back to this slide, is that next year when we have 3 sections of grade 4, we're actually having conversations about putting 2 special educators with that team because of the needs of the kids. So that would be the team. It might even be a team of 5 educators for 3 sections, because that's where the greatest need is. And we're going to only use what we have because that's all we got. But that's an example, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to show this slide. Okay. So our social emotional goal, and I also want to thank, I don't know who sent the question, but it allowed us, when I looked at the slides that we had on the original deck, I was able to add a couple of things, and Matt and I talked more about how to talk about one of the things that's here specifically. The question was, it seems pretty similar to what was presented last year, but I really want to emphasize that this bubble, we've added tons of kids, and we've also added staff who haven't been trained in responsive classroom. And even though we have been using the responsive classroom, we've added also social thinking so that we can give the younger kids especially a very specific language around how to explain their emotions and their feelings, especially when there is conflict and when they are in a place that isn't comfortable for them. So Carrie Tomlin, our school counselor, this is a picture of her working with one of the primary grades where she's giving them language to use to match their feelings so that we can begin to search for how to de-escalate. And I think that that's really what we're talking about most of the time when we talk about conflict with kids with adults or with kids, then how to take it to a level that's going to still allow kids to be learners and still allow kids to be part of the community. So to that end, we added this slide and talks a little bit about what we've done to make sure that the assistants, both classroom and special education assistants, are part of what's happening in there so that crisis teams don't have to be called to intervene when kids are experiencing dysregulation. And they can use training that that the other adults in the building are using to de-escalate things and prevent things from carrying to another place. We also have full safety care training for the building level team, which means what we call crisis, what are we calling it now?
Student response.
Student response team. We're trying to take the word crisis out of it just to sort of dysregulate ourselves. And the ongoing staff work, this is really the biggest piece on the development of our behavioral rubric. You can see the zones of regulation here. A couple of districts have used a rubric that helps kids and teachers to understand where children are, what's causing an incident or an escalation or kids to start to spin out, and how to really practically minimize that's happening and to keep the kid in the classroom and keep the kid in a learning place so that everybody is okay. This is something that we're working on with the staff. It's really been an interesting kind of an experience because the districts that have had this, we started with Sudbury because they're the ones that produced this first behavior rubric, and that's what piqued our interest in it. It's something that describes responses, and the teachers are all saying, well, this is not something that fits who we are. This is something that may fit another district, but for what we are as a building and who we are as a staff and who the kids are in our school, we've got to make sure that we develop a rubric or a tool that's going to fit our particular school. So that work is ongoing. It's moving a little bit more slowly than I thought it would, but that's public schools, I think, for the most part. Do you want to ask some questions about this particular piece?
Well, I just have a question. So is the zones of regulation what you're talking about specifically that
Yes.
you looked at? So doesn't Blanchard use the zones of regulation?
The zones certainly inform it. I think For me, as I think about it, one of the other pieces of the social thinking language really that we use with children is the size of the problem and size of your reaction. And so when we begin to think about a behavioral rubric, we're looking both at the students, but also at the faculty. And this is responsive to our changing population, the changing needs, what we're trying to do programmatically, so that teachers have a better guide to help them moderate their responses to potential misbehaviors in the classroom and how to guide them. And so certainly I threw the zones in there because all of us need to think about how we're regulating our emotions, whether we use the term crisis or not.
No, I was just curious if that was the specific, because the picture is there, and you're talking about a behavioral rubric. I just was unclear when you were talking about a behavioral rubric, and then you were like, well, Sudbury uses it, and I mean, Blanchard has this. So I just didn't. To me, that looked like it was tied, and I just wasn't sure.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Sorry, we don't have the rubric completed yet.
Yeah, so it is not developed. Yeah. Yeah, the interesting thing is that this goes along with having teachers involved in the planning of the rubric. Also gives them insights into how their own behaviors, as Matt talked about, can be regulated and changed too. It's a big change for regular ed teachers to understand that they're responsible for the teaching of all of the children in the classroom. And it's something that I talked about before where when you begin co-teaching models, whatever form they take, it also means that the kids are going to be with the teachers in the classroom, and there's a greater understanding now that teachers own their kids. And I think that that's something, rather than there be a division of general education with typically developing children and special education for children who have needs. We're trying to integrate these two communities in a way that builds one community rather than sort of halfway, you go here at certain times for this instruction and you stay here for this kind of instruction too. So it's really an effort to actually develop more community in keeping kids part of what happens in a regular classroom community. The Parent Education Forum, it was last year we talked about this. I briefly spoke about it because it had happened the night before our presentation on our school improvement plan. And it so blew me away that we had over 350 families of people attend. And we did a rotation through the workshop, responsive classroom, and the art integration last year. That I'm reporting on it again because I didn't really report on it last year because this was part of our goal. It was just such an exciting thing, and we're still having people ask about it, but we've decided not to do it each year, but rather wait till we have significant shifts in new populations till a kindergarten parent population moves up to, say, second or third grade, so that there can be a greater understanding of it. Last year it was particularly important to do because we did add almost 90 kids because when we added the bubble, and many of them were new to the community, and so it would seem like a perfect time to do something like that. Our engagement goal this year is about the mathematical curriculum, the mathematics curriculum. We've completely switched over for a K-5 to investigations. We wanted to improve the outcomes that we're experiencing in the past few years. We also have a different kind of population now, and I think that investigations is something that is a little bit more respectful about kids who have different kinds of needs in the classroom. And so we're doing investigations, K-5. This will be the first year for grades 4 and 5. Kindergarten has been doing it consistently for a number of years now. And of course, in 6th grade, we're using illustrative mathematics, which I think is wonderful. The kids are really responding to it. But I also have the teachers are telling us that this is something that the kids are responding to in a very positive way too. And I don't know if it's the contrast simply between the old curriculum that we used, which was getting tired anyway, But I think that we're finding that the way that this particular curriculum structures the introduction of content-specific areas has really been changing for the teachers. So for instance, to begin with multiplication in 3rd grade was really a surprise. That's very different than most people have known. And so the teachers have had to shake up some of the things that they're doing. And as you can imagine, that also has a cascading effect too on other grades and what they're thinking about and how to change what they're doing with instruction. So I think that this has been something that's been certainly engaging for teachers because they are really trying to learn something new. And in that learning that they're doing, that professional learning, and then they're adding it to their practice, engages the kids too because it's also brand new. That's it.
The math curriculum, is that just in McCarthy Town, or is that happening district-wide with?
It's happening in a few other schools. I know that's happening in Merriam. They've done it for a couple of years before, that we have. But it's something that actually, when I began teaching many years ago, it was the innovative constructivist curriculum. And there were problems with it because there wasn't enough work on computation, at least at the primary level. So people began exploring other kinds of curricula, and they found that this one had so many important pieces that paid attention to individual learning styles, individual learning abilities within a grade level, that teachers were using parts of this and parts of that and parts of some other things. And now they've pulled it together to produce a really coherent kind of a curriculum that makes sense for all the kids, and it works. So I find it to be terrific, and I'm really glad that this is something that really recognized its importance, but also took the time to revamp it over the years.
It's not a question, it's really a comment, maybe a request. So I saw those 2 slides, and I was like, that was from last year, and I was like, well, what's new? And I was like, okay, I'll go on your website. And I found, I was like jumping out of my chair with excitement. I mean, I found the minutes from their school council meeting from February 8th, 2019. And it really, thank you so much for adding those slides, because it's I really understand how that you're trying to integrate these zones of regulation with the social thinking and responsive class. I mean, they're 3 very different products. So it's incredibly innovative. And they do different things really well, and so to try to weave them together is quite a challenge. And I appreciate that. And I really, it was very exciting for me to read that in the minutes. I'm wondering if maybe the minutes could somehow be in the packet or something as a companion to school. I know that some of them aren't posted.
No, I could definitely attach something. That would be fine.
And it was the same thing for the parent forum. The fact that 250 or so parents attended, and it's not even the minutes say it's not feasible or practical to repeat every year, but maybe we'll do it through K through. I mean, it really kind of breathes life into what's going on, and it really demonstrates really very powerfully to us how the leadership and the school council works together to produce this.
This is a good time for me to give a shout out to the school council, because I think that they're a remarkable group. Our meetings last too long, and because nobody wants to leave. Although we used to start at 7 a.m., now we start at 7:30. I can live with that, but the thing is that we're doing good work, and I think that each of the people, both teachers and parents who make up that group, are invested in the school, and they're invested in all kids, not simply their own. And they aren't there to protect the interests of their children, they're there to protect the interests of all of our kids and of the school. So I applaud them for their work.
It sounds like that you're building very strong community connection, and I see that there's a lot of special kids. So do you see any trouble when they transition the grade? because the relationship's so strong at each grade, is there any like overlapping so they can?
Do you want to speak to that? I mean, I think Matt has been terrific at leading some of the teachers through some of the most important parts of community building using those three pieces. Do you want to talk to that at all?
I think David mentioned it briefly earlier. You know, placement plays such a crucial role in that handoff in any of those transitions. We've already begun those discussions for what the class cohorts might look like next year. Obviously, it's multifaceted as we're thinking about what co-teaching is going to add to that and what it's going to look like at each grade. But the receiving teachers at some point are also invited into that conversation, along with counselor and psychologists and special educators, everybody. So those transitions really are not jarring or drastic for any of the kids, particularly because we do have that sense of a K-6 community with shared expectations, shared beliefs. It makes it's a very similar feel in the majority of the classrooms.
So the kids are able to experience the same kind of teacher expectations and use of language in the classroom, and I think that that's really gone a long way towards, just as you would do a mathematics, you want to have something that has continuity because the language of the mathematics is still the same. It's still the same in workshop, and it's still the same with the social curriculum. So that provides the kids are going to be able to transition well.
Actually, is that when I look into this slides and this presentation, one thing just impressed me. I just had one impression that we have three goals, right? So the way that we interpret the three goals probably pretty narrow. For example, equity, right? So we currently that when the school present this, it's just focus on the difference between general education and special education needs. But the equity also is broader than that, right? So we talk about in our I recall that in our one night we discussed all the the goals we want to reach, our core values. So one thing is that was that the diversity, right, is also like the equity also cover that. So the same thing as engagement is only like focused on the students. So I hope that we can. I just feel that it's too narrow. So.
Thank you. I thought this was really a great presentation, and it's wonderful to learn about all of the different things that you're doing. And I have a question about the co-teaching model that that I'm just trying to understand sort of the practical implementation of it, I think, and especially about that idea of rather than pulling students out, offering more of the instruction in the classroom. So what I'm wondering about that is, you mentioned that you had tried a block schedule before in order to have a time period when there's not new material being introduced for kids who are pulled out. Will you still be doing that for students who need the individual instruction, regardless of where some students will need something different?
Yeah, there's still going to be a need for pulling out for specific kinds of instruction, especially, it goes to the dyslexia conversation especially for Wilson reading, which isn't practical to do inside the classroom. So we still have some of that. And we're still trying to work on some of the other things about when is it practical to do X and when is it practical to do Y. The teachers have experimented with their schedule within the 6th grade, and they've changed it now in a major way 2 times to be able to accommodate this new knowledge about having all of these adults in the classroom and how this works. It's going to be a work in progress, and I don't think that we're ever going to come up with something that we can say is the system that works the best. And to your other question, we do have work block. We call it work block just because it's a chunk of time, and we try to stagger that chunk of time across the master schedule so that each of the grades can have the experience of the specific special educators who aren't attached to classrooms specifically yet. So it's also a major league question of scheduling, of which Matt is an absolute master, in terms of how we use time in the school day. And, you know, it's interesting, the notion of going all day K and the hybrid models we've been compelled now to put all three of our K sections in the morning for specials to make sure that they each get their schedules, their specials too. So that has an impact on how we do everything else. All of our schedules have to start someplace, and everything has to wheel around it to go this way. And it's a difficult thing to do. And then each of the teachers have to work out individual schedules with the special educators to make sure that all the service delivery stuff happens at an appropriate time. And that's really what drove us to start to think more deeply about this other way of instruction, and keeping kids in the classroom and keeping teachers in the classroom is a way to sort of avoid the schedule snafus that can happen all the time in terms of both service delivery and about meeting curricular needs for everybody.
Thank you, David. I know it's really hard to go first, and we had a lot of questions, and I know you put a lot of extra effort into adding some slides to answer some of the questions ahead of time, so I really appreciate the work that you put into it. It was very informative, and I know in our community there's often questions like, well, what does it mean to go to McCarthy Town? What are the differences between the schools? And that question is often answered by parents who haven't gone to the other 5 schools. But I think that this is a really good place through these school improvement plans for parents to get a taste of what actually goes on at McCarthy Town. I think this is very telling. It shares a lot of what's important to you as a school and what happens in your community. So thank you for being very thorough.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you to all of you. Well, actually, you know, this is such an interesting experiment that we're doing. And I would like to sort of, as we begin to develop a sense of what's been successful and what needs to be worked on and what I already know what the challenges are, I'd love to come and share maybe in the fall more about what we're learning and what the configuration ends up looking like in the fall too. So if you're interested.
I think that would be a wonderful follow-up. Thank you. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt.
All right. Number 8. We have 2 sets of draft minutes that were in the addendum. So I'm looking for a motion to approve those minutes.
Move to approve?
What? You received comments on 2 of them. All right.
I'm not used to doing this. Okay, so for the draft minutes of Budget Saturday, January 25th, on the second page, in the middle of the page, under audience questions, the second bullet, the last sentence of that, it has been suggested that it read, a member read the voted school committee motion to remind the public, instead of read the actual vote. And then a second comment, the same minutes, page 4, under questions, third bullet, which is the last bullet, instead of in any bond return plan, it was suggested it read in any program involving a series of projects, comma, the accuracy of the plan is higher in the first years. And that's all that I received.
Okay.
Move to approve as amended.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Great. Those pass unanimously. Okay. We have a recommendation to authorize the superintendent to submit to the MSBA the statement of interest for the Blanchard Memorial School. Sorry, my packet's all like messed up now.
so included in your packet. It was a late addition. We had a little bit of last-minute confusion on our end, but it is the statement of interest for the Blanchard School. The major change from last year, if you recall, earlier in the year I updated you that MSBA was no longer accepting any window projects, and if you applied for a window and door project, they took you right out of the pipeline. We've since removed the windows from the statement of interest, and this is really a roof repair at this point for Blanchard, so that's what we're looking to submit.
And the motion language is in your packet.
While someone is looking for the motion language, I read through the statement of interest, and in looking for exactly what Peter said, something that had been clearly restricted to roof only. So there's still in the text various references to windows, but in the key section where it says we're doing a roof. So I'm assuming that is now sufficiently corrected to be compliant with the roof only requirement of the MSBA.
Yeah, they make you in the drop-down boxes actually comment on the mechanical systems, the roofing systems. I think they're just getting at the envelope in general, but I don't know if you noticed, but there's a drop-down box that says, are you requesting this as part of the repair? And there's a no for that.
Yeah, is this the one that begins with resolved? Yes. Resolved, having convened in an open meeting on February 6, 2020, prior to the SOI submission closing date, the Acton-Boxborough Regional School Committee of Acton and Boxborough, in accordance with its charter, bylaws, and ordinances, has voted to authorize the superintendent to submit to the Massachusetts School Building Authority the statement of interest form dated February 6, 2020 for the Blanchard Memorial Elementary School located at 493 Massachusetts Ave, Boxborough, Mass., which describes and explains the following deficiencies and priority categories for which an application may be submitted to the Massachusetts School Building Authority in the future. Which is the replacement, renovation, or modernization of school facility systems such as roofs, windows, boilers, heating, and ventilation systems to increase energy and conservation and decrease energy-related costs in the school facility, and hereby further specifically acknowledges that by submitting the statement of interest form, the Massachusetts School Building Authority in no way guarantees the acceptance or the approval of an application, the awarding of a grant or any other funding commitment from the Massachusetts School Building Authority, or commits the city or the regional school district to filing an application for funding with the Massachusetts School Building Authority.
Ginny? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Great, that passes unanimously. We have a recommendation to approve $5,611.13 gift from AB Friends of Music for the ABRHS Performing Arts 2020 New York City Band Trip.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Great, that also passes unanimously. We also have a recommendation to approve a $2,100 gift from the Conan PTO to the Conan School for reading materials. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Great. That also passes unanimously. Okay. Marie, it says you are giving us a school committee building update. I don't know. Your name's on the agenda.
So, yeah.
That's okay.
So Marie and I are in transition because one of the things that we'd been working on is we were heading toward the vote. I was doing a lot of the external work. Marie leads a lot of the programming work that takes place. School building project is progressing. JD is in the process of receiving RFPs for solar energy, and we're very excited about that being able to move forward. There's a huge cost savings in terms of the operational life of the building that we'll be able to document. We also are engaging in a series of programming meetings. We are in the design development stage. At this point, the building committee is really digging into the details of what this building looks like. So we just had a presentation at the last school building committee meeting this week, last night, or Yeah, wow. Around exterior look of the building, actually a week ago, excuse me, it was a week ago, around the exterior look of the building and digging into finishes, look of brick, things like that, to make sure we have that nailed down during the schematic design phase, design development phase. We are now moving into doing a lot of the internal programming meetings over the next week or two to be able to button up interior finishes, and we're going back out, engaging our faculty and stakeholders and feedback during that process to be able to bring it back to the building committee. So we are moving along on schedule.
Great. We have 3 second read policies ready to be voted tonight. Amy?
Yeah, so policy sub met earlier this week. The 3 policies that you that already had a first read, we're looking for a vote tonight. There were some slight edits to residency and student enrollment, which you can see in your packet. And then the other 2 policies are unchanged. So we're just looking for a vote tonight.
Are we going to vote the 3 policies separately?
Yes. Right? He asked if we were going to vote the 3 policies separately. Yes. Okay.
So I'll move to approve.
Which policy? Can you just list it?
I'm trying to get to it. Oh, yeah. So I'll move to approve the education opportunities for children in foster care.
Second?
Yes, John?
I will be voting against this because, once again, if you run this through the readability checker, it satisfies the statute and does not satisfy my requirements for readability.
Any other commentary?
I just didn't hear that.
He said it's not readable enough for him, so he'll be voting against it. Okay. Are we ready to vote? Michael, what are you doing? Okay, that's okay. Are you ready to vote? Yeah, okay. Nope, the first one. So we're voting educational opportunities for children in foster care, file JFABF. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed?
Nay.
Any abstentions? All right, so that was all of us except for John. Would someone like to make a motion for the second one?
So I'll move to approve the residency and student enrollment policy.
Second.
Any commentary, John?
For the same reason, I will be voting no.
Okay. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed?
Nay.
Any abstentions? All right, thank you. And the third policy?
Can I just interrupt for a sec before
Sure.
you make a motion? The title of that policy is changed in the changing of the policy. So I think when you make your motion, it's policy IMD is religious and cultural holidays is the new title of it. Thank you. Right, just on the agenda, it didn't have the new title.
Hang on, I'm looking at the markup one. I think there was a... yeah, I'll move to approve the religious and cultural holiday policy.
Any commentary, John? You good on this one?
I'm going to vote in favor of this one.
Great, okay. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Great, that one passes unanimously. Yeah, sure.
I want to make one comment about policy. The readability factor is important. If people don't understand the policy, that's a problem. But it's more complicated than that, and I think it's important for everybody to understand that there's legal language that sometimes must be included. So it probably would behoove the policy subcommittee to have maybe a conversation about what goes into building policy and the importance when weighting the different factors that go into it, because we want policies that aren't going to kind of throw us into violations when people come around to audit us.
Just to second what Diane said, obviously my concern is not readability per se. It's, is the policy reaching the intended audience and having the intended effect? And so in order to look at this, you need to look at each of these policies and say, who is my audience? And if this is my audience, how is that audience understanding the policy? And that really is very different, for different kinds of policies. So it is a long conversation.
Thank you. Okay. Diane, did you want to have any additional updates on budget? I know we talked sort of extensively about budget.
Yeah, just briefly. So we met Friday, right after Budget Saturday, we met Friday, the 27th. And we talked about just one of the things I wanted to just really highlight is the staffing report in our budget. We're adding, I can't emphasize this enough, we're adding 8.2 FTEs, about 16 or so people, with a net cost of 0. And I think, we should really understand how really, I don't know, the word magical kind of jumps in. I don't know how they did it, but they thank you to the leadership for that. We're able to meet our needs and do it at a net cost of 0 for this budget. So we did talk about that. The other thing that we talked about was and Peter alluded to this in the beginning, that this budget, right after the preliminary budget was floated to us, we made $522,000 in cuts. And that was proactive on our part, and it built into a fluidity and a collaborative kind of culture to this budget cycle that I have not ever seen here, I don't think, as long as I've been on the committee. So I really feel good about this budget cycle for those two reasons alone. There are more reasons than that, but we talked about both of those things in budget sub, and I wanted to just highlight them for you. And just really, we should feel good about carrying this budget, forward to town meeting.
Thank you. Amy, did you want to update on ALG?
ALG met last night. We heard a report from Minuteman Technical High School, and I don't know if Peter, you want to mention anything that came out of that, but they really went over their budget to try and explaining how they came up with the numbers they did.
I think the most significant update from Minuteman, they did do a review of their budget scenario. On the operating side, they had about a 6.5% increase. I'm going to say, is that pretty accurate, Dave? Just over 6% was their actual operating budget increase. However, we also had additional students counted in the state enrollment calculation that goes into that. And so the combination of the budget increase of around 6.5%, the additional student enrollment, the new debt from the building project, as well as one of the member districts has withdrawn, and that is Belmont. And so there was a redistribution of the total assessment across all of the remaining districts. That's what led to the almost 20% increase in the Minuteman operating assessment this year. That will likely be a trend over the next several years. Minuteman is expanding their enrollment, and because of that, they are accepting additional students from all of the member districts. Our enrollment is looking like it will go from about 36 students this year to, I believe they're projecting they will enroll 62 of our students next year. That will carry with it an impact on the operating assessment as that moves forward. So I think it's probably likely that we should anticipate operating assessments between 15 and 20% increases over the next 4 years as their enrollment increases to its full potential. I think that's just something we need to be aware of on the school side. It's a great program. It offers amazing opportunities for our kids, but we need to be cognizant of that as we're budgeting, because that assessment does come out of the total pool of resources, and with Acton against its levy, we just need to be sensitive to that. There are going to be limited funds, and that's going to be one of our constraining factors. So, we were able to get through the FY21 budget. We've already started talking about FY22 a little bit and doing some projections. I think we have a couple tough budget years ahead of us, in all honesty. I think we've seen some of the easier years in our rearview mirror. So just be thinking about that, but it was it was insightful to understand the enrollment projections, especially as it could impact us in the future. Dave, Marie, would you add anything to that?
I'm sorry, I have one more thing. So we did close the gap on the, what do you call the sheet? The financial model, yeah, okay. Yes, thank you. But one thing that I promised to bring up to the full committee is that there was a great deal of concern that we chose this particular year to lower the all-day K tuition. And it felt like this was really the wrong time to do it. And I said that I would share those feelings. I think Peter did a great job of explaining that this was an entire budget, and this is this was part of our entire budget plan, and the reaching the goals that our core values, supporting our core values. And they really wanted, especially from FinCom, for us to be aware of how much this impact is having on our townspeople. So I just wanted to share that.
So I'm the liaison to FinCom, and that is exactly what not all members, but several members are very, very strongly opposed to what we did. So we just have to be very clear about why we did that. This is public education. I know that there's only a cohort of kindergartners, but there's only a cohort of all grades. So why kindergarten in public education gets funded the way it does, I don't know the history of it, but we should be very aware of our reasons and talk to people about those reasons, because they're not shared right now.
I could share the history of that with you sometime if you want.
Yes, John? Is there a big update, John? Would you like to update us?
I just want to mention one thing with respect to future budgets. One of the topics of discussion this morning was providing guidance to the entities earlier, so that the assumption would be based on the people who in theory should know what's going on. So in our June meeting, we will attempt to develop guidance. If we can't do it then, we will do it in September, so that early in the budget process, you'll have a better understanding of where health insurance rates are likely to go.
Thank you, John. I wasn't able to attend the BLFE meeting, but I know that Nora and Michael both did. So did you have any updates?
I can give a quick update. Before that, I want to follow up what John said. So for the budget, and I hope that, because why look into this, the school by school, their plan for the next year. So if we could, hear that, have those presentation before the budget is set. So that would be helpful for all the, community members to understand, how we construct the budget, and how that, why, we need, probably 1 point FTE in this school or maybe more. So that'd be great. I mean, if we can have the presentation earlier.
So the school council presentations are not necessarily tied to the way we develop the budget. Like Peter is aware of what their school improvement plans are and all of those things. Those presentations, we don't have to approve their school improvement plans. Those presentations are to help us better understand more the opposite way of how our budget impacts what they're doing in their schools and how budget asks that they've had before. So what David presented tonight was what they've been doing all year. When his school improvement plan was accepted in June of last year. We don't approve them, but that's when Peter received it, correct?
Yeah, I think, one of the challenges always on school improvement plan updates, to do them early in the year, is if the principals only start the work in September, if we try to bring them to you in November, they haven't done anything yet. Professional development days, are typically stretched out over a whole school year. And so if we try to bring them in too early, there's not really much to tell. I think what we sometimes see is budgeting is almost a year off of some of those school improvement plans. So sometimes what you might see in a school improvement plan for this year, that will come out in June, you would see as some budget requests maybe the following year.
So just for the BRF update, so we actually updated the BRF that, we had the preliminary vote on the school budget, and also we told them that we would vote on this Thursday. That already happened. So in the Gary, the Boxborough FinCom chair updated the BRF with the data strategy option that we would go with, recommend, and those were all about the school-related business. And the rest of the meeting, they were discussing the town projects and the town budget.
We have warrants to sign tonight. Hopefully it made its way all the way around the table. There are 9 warrants on the agenda. Vendor warrants 20-015 in the amount of $4,433,607.97. 20-015 PR in the amount of $576,038.05. 20-016 in the amount of $480,940.90. 20-016 PR in the amount of $1,267,212.52. Student Activity Fund warrants 20-015 SH in the amount of $33,228.22. 20-016 SH in the amount of $12,543.96. 20-016 JH in the amount of $13,631.67. And payroll warrants P2015 in the amount of $2,636,628.02. And P2016 in the amount of $2,651,833.86. See, we made it almost to the very end. So item 14 is the FYI. Peter, are there any FYI items that you wanted to?
I think they're all listed and they're okay.
Okay, great. So we have the need for an executive session tonight pursuant to MGL Chapter 30A, Section 21A, Purpose 3, to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining with the Acton-Boxborough Education Association, ABEA, because an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining position of the committee. Is there? All right. Yeah, right. I said we needed, then we needed someone to second, and now we have to do a roll call. Okay, so we're going to do a roll call vote. Michael, can we start with you? Just say yes. Maya?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
All right, excellent. We will return to open meeting for the sole purpose of adjourning.